many of them, which I have been in contact with, they are actually, even if they are 50, they are able to increase their maximal oxygen uptake because they are not at their upper limit.
That Triathlon Show 176. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Falck Hansen, who is a Danish cycling coach and a researcher who has a PhD in glycogen metabolism. And our topic for today is solving the top 5 challenges for the aging athlete or for masters athletes in general, both in terms of triathlon specifically, but more generally endurance athletes. Before we get into the episode, big thanks as always to our sponsors. First, we have Precision Hydration that make electrolyte products to help you get hydrated and stay hydrated. And this is all according to your individual sweat sodium content and your sweat rate. You can find out more about that by taking their free online sweat test, which is a simple quiz of 10 questions that you can answer in a few minutes time without doing any special measurements, just qualitative information, and that will give you a very good ballpark estimate for what type of electrolyte needs you have in your racing and training. Also, make sure that you check out the blog that they have. They have plenty of great articles about hydration and its importance, but also other things outside of hydration, just general endurance sports information that is really, really good and high quality content. So go to precisionhydration.com, check them out, and if you want to buy any electrolyte products, you can get your first box for free with the promo code THATTRIATHLONSHOW, all one word, all caps. And thank you to Roka, which is the world's leading brand for wetsuits, triathlon apparel, and performance eyewear. And one of my favorite pieces of Roka equipment that I haven't talked that much about is the tri-suit, the Gen 2 Elite tri-suit. And there are several reasons for why I really like this tri-suit. Of course, it's very, very comfortable and it looks really, really nice and fast. That's a given. Any tri-suit should fit these criteria. But the more important ones that really make this suit stand out against the competition, I would say, is its aerodynamic properties as well as its flexibility in the water due to the arms up technology. And that means that this suit really works together with the Roka wetsuit in maximizing your flexibility and your range of motion during the swim portion. You're not restricted by your wetsuit nor by your tri-suit. And in terms of aerodynamics, they've done tons of wind tunnel testing and testing in general, really invested heavily in R&D to make sure that the aero panels on these suits are really, really top notch. And I could feel it immediately the first time I went out for a ride with the suit that it's really made a difference in the speeds that I were putting out at the same sort of power. So if you're interested in the Gen 2 Elite tri-suit or any other products, wetsuits, sunglasses, goggles, etc., go to Roka.com. Remember that they now have shipping from Europe as well as the United States. So that is great news for us European customers. And you can use the promo code TTS, all caps, to get 20% off your entire order. So without any further ado, let's get into the interview with Falck Hansen. Today's guest on That Triathlon Show is Falck Hansen from Denmark. Welcome to That Triathlon Show, Bo.
Thank you very much. I have been looking forward to this for a while now.
It's great to have you, and I was very pleased that you're somebody who came recommended from a listener of the podcast, which is always nice to hear, a professional young cyclist that you coach actually. So that was a nice way to get introduced, and the topic that you sort of specialize in is one that is very relevant for a lot of listeners with what to do with doing endurance sports and when you're aging and how to tackle some challenges. But before we dive into that topic, can you just give a quick bio and introduction of yourself, who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I can do that. I'm almost 60 years old now, and I am a researcher of profession. I'm employed at a pharmaceutical company, and I have a PhD in glycogen metabolism, you can say. I started off as a sort of a sports physiologist looking into the storage of glycogen in muscle with the perspective of what does it mean to have a high glycogen level and how do we get this high glycogen level and so on and so forth. And then eventually I went into to the industry and worked with diabetes, which I have done for quite a few years now, and have now turned into you can say more looking at the aging, so longevity and the impact of age on muscle size and on your aerobic capacity. And at the same time, I'm a certified trainer from the Danish Sports Confederation, and I have mostly for many years trained young athletes like the one that we discussed in the beginning, and but lately, maybe due to my own age, but I have started to work with master athletes, and I found out that there is quite a difference training young people and people which are not super young anymore. And I find actually that's kind of interesting and also challenging in the sense that it is a little bit different. I mean, young people are very, very enthusiastic and very eager, and it's more a problem of controlling them in order to make them train the right way. But the master athletes, they do have some other challenges which I find kind of interesting.
So we'll get into that very soon. But first, at what age do you think that you start to see like these changes? Of course, it's a gradual, continuous process. But when would you consider somebody in the category that you need to apply these sort of concepts?
Yeah, for my own sake, I would say that my peak performance was a little late, actually, like 43. I think my age where I had the highest VO2 max. But I guess the decline starts already when you're 20 or 25 or something. But for most athletes who trained, they do not feel a setback before they are around 40. Maybe a little, it depends on the discipline, of course. But in endurance athletes, many athletes can compete to a very high level even at 40, and we have seen that with the Tour and other. But also in women's sports, there are quite a few which are over 40 years old.
And I think especially for amateur athletes that maybe start later in life, that can definitely be true.
Yeah, that is true.
Okay, so let's get into, you have 5 challenges that you talk about. You do this as a sort of a presentation for a lot of different clubs and federations, etc. So we'll just follow your lead here and get into it. So what are the top 5 challenges that come with age?
Yeah, I would say that this is part of experience on own body, but also reading a lot of literature lately. I would say that there are 5. You can obviously find more than 5, but I will have grouped them into 5 challenges, where I would say the three of them are the big ones, and then there's 2 minor ones which also play a role, but is not as heavily investigated in the scientific literature. But the 3 big ones is the decline in VO2 max, and that is like everybody knows that this decline with age. And then there's what I call shrinking muscle wasting, which is due to age. And then the final one is that the metabolism in your body is changed. So in contrast to young people, you have different hormone levels, which will have an impact on your metabolism of carbohydrates and lipids and protein and so on. So that is the 3 big ones. And then the 2 minor ones is sort of the decreased flexibility and balance and coordination, that you tend to be more dizzy when you do merry-go-rounds, and you tend to be more difficult walking downstairs and stuff like that. And then the final one, I think, is one which is quite important, but that is sort of the mental attitude towards getting older. And I think that has an impact on all the other 4 challenges, I would say.
Probably in most sports, but most triathletes, they would be very happy because they are moving up in age group, so the competition typically gets a little bit easier.
Exactly. I'm, as I said, I'm almost 60, and I have been for a couple of years now looking forward to getting 60 because my ability to beat the guys who just moved into the men's 50 category is non-existent. So I'm looking forward actually to getting 60 because then I can start competing again.
Exactly.
So yeah, I guess you're right.
Yeah. So let's tackle these challenges and dive into more detail on them then. So maybe start wherever you want to start with, maybe declining VO2 max or.
Yeah, I think we all know that VO2 max is very important for your athletic performance. It sort of set the ceiling so that if you have a high VO2 max, your ability to increase your anaerobic threshold is much higher than if you have a low VO2 max. I mean, the VO2 max is sort of the ceiling of your aerobic capacity. So it's in all conditions, in most endurance sports, I mean, the aim is to have as high VO2 max as possible. And the issue here is then that, that will start to decline quite early, maybe 25 or something, it will start to decline. And eventually it will get to a very low value and it will get into to what I call the death zone. There is sort of a certain lower limit of VO2 max, which is dangerous for you. And most athletes will not experience this, but for people who do not train, there is a sort of a limit around 20 milliliters of oxygen per minute per kilo, which is a place where you don't want to go because it is associated with an increased risk of death and all other kinds of diseases. So, but for most athletes, we are not in that zone, but we still have a decrease in VO2 max. And you can sort of, if you look at a curve where you look at the decline, it's the steepness of the curve, the rate of decline is then dependent on how you behave. And if you stop exercising, I mean, there have been quite a number of longitudinal studies showing that even if you have a very, very high VO2 max at the age of 25 and you stop doing hard training, then you will actually eventually reach your lower limit or a sedentary line of decline in the VO2 max. It's not like that you, by some divine intervention, has the ability to keep your VO2 max at a high level, even though that you have been among the best in the world. You will decline, and you will decline more rapidly if you stop exercising. That is quite clear from the studies from Booth and others who have looked into this in longitudinal studies where they have examined people at various ages and then looked how and some of these studies were actually quite long. They looked at people for, I don't know, maybe 30 years. And it is, the take home for this is that the moment you stop doing what you did in the old days, then the decline would be more rapid.
How quick is the decline on average, or as a ballpark number, if you stop exercising?
Yeah, if you stop exercising, at least the studies by Booth, they looked a little bit like that within maybe 5 or 10 years you would be down to the sedentary level, and so.
And with the sedentary level, do you refer to that 20 milliliters per minute per kilogram that you refer to?
No, not necessarily. I mean, if you look at a normal individual, you will start off at 25 with a maximal uptake of maybe 45, and then eventually getting to the age of 80, you will get into the sort of danger zone of 20 or 25 milliliters. And those athletes that they looked at, they had a very high maximal uptake in the age of 50. They were around 60, and then if they stopped exercise, they reached the lower line within 10 years or 20 years. So, and whereas the other ones which kept on doing high intensity exercise, they were still at 50, even though that they reached 70 years old. So there is quite an impact on how you behave. So your sort of lifestyle is having a big impact on how steep this curve will be. I mean, the decline will be there no matter what you do. You cannot avoid it. But what I'm saying is that if you do hard training, you will keep your decline on the upper line, you can say. and that will, for as long as people have looked, be about the death zone. So you will still, and there's a very interesting study of a 101-year-old French guy who, at the age of 101, he had a oxygen uptake of 30, and then he went on. He wanted to make the world record in 1 hour racing in the velodrome. So he went training for 2 years, 5,000 kilometers a year, and then his VO2 max increased 13%. So even at the age of 100, you can still do it. I mean, it depends. I mean, I look at it like that you have two curves. One is your upper curve and one is your lower curve. And if you train hard, you will always be at the upper curve. And at that point, you will not be able to increase your VO2 max because you are already at the top. But for most people, not being in the world elite, you are not at the top curve, so you will always be able to increase. And they have made quite a few studies on this, and that is also my experience from training master athletes, is that many of them, which I have been in contact with, they are actually, even if they are 50, they are able to increase their maximal oxygen uptake because they are not at their upper limit. So it is a very important take-home that almost no matter what, you will always be able to increase your VO2 max. Of course, if you're already maxed out and you are at the upper curve, then there's no improvement possible for you, but then the job is to keep being at that upper curve. So I think it is very encouraging that even though that you are maybe have 3 kids and you have worked a lot and you are 40 years old and you think, well, my career is over, I will never be able to be a competitive athlete anymore. That is far from true. That is actually quite wrong, because you will be able to increase your VO2 max if you are at a sort of a lower level than you can attain. So
yeah, and I think that most amateur athletes, I've had this discussion with several athletes that I coach, that it's very few of us are actually at our own genetic potential, and even with these older athletes, that they're, because simply most athletes haven't trained the way that you really maximize your VO2 max gains. So let's get into that a bit.
I completely agree.
You mentioned intensity there, so and I think that's something that you will point out as being a key for keeping that high VO2 max or increasing it even. And so what can you tell us about intensity and its role in this?
Yeah, I mean, most of us know that we know approximately our anaerobic threshold. So that is the sort of the difference between being able to perform for a longer time and only performing for a few minutes. And there have been several studies where they have looked at fairly well-trained people, an oxygen uptake of 60 or so, and they have divided them into different groups. And one example is a study where they did a very interesting study, actually, where they did 4 groups, and they divided them into one training which was called high volume training, and it was a lot of training, not very high intensity, but a lot of training. The other one was called threshold, where they, in average, did 4 sessions of threshold training every week. Not as high volume as the first one, but fairly high volume and a lot of threshold training. And then they had one called HIT, where they did a lot of high intensity training, but not too much volume. And then the last one was called Polarized training, where they did approximately 2 hard trainings a week, and the rest was sort of low intensity. And then they looked at they did this for 9 weeks, and then they looked at the VO2 max. And the very interesting finding was that the polarized training, they got a 12% increase in the VO2 max. And the HIT training get a small increase of 5%, and the high volume training was more or less the same, 2.6 increase. But the disappointing thing, especially for those did the threshold training, was that after 9 weeks of threshold training, there was a 4% decrease in the VO2 max. And I think several studies have shown exactly the same, that if you are fairly trained and you do threshold training, it's hard on you, and but you will not increase your VO2 max because you're already fairly trained. So in order to do this, you need to include high intensity training in your training.
Is this the study by Stögel and Spirlish?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
So I just want to clarify one thing for the listeners, because the threshold group here, I remember this study. It's not exactly the same as most listeners would consider threshold. So it's more like, I guess, tempo. So between the first and second lactate threshold. So not like at your anaerobic threshold where you're working very hard and you can only hold that for 1 hour if you go all out in a race, basically. But it's slightly lower than that. So it's sort of that mid zone, the gray zone type of training. Just to make that clear for the listeners, because I do remember this study.
I totally agree that the word you used, gray, I think that is an important word. And I always, when I'm coach, I'm saying try to avoid gray training, because gray training, if you are fairly trained, will not give you anything in particular. But I guess you're right. If you do threshold training, like very hard threshold training, you will be able to hold it for maybe 20 minutes or so. It will also have an effect. And there are studies where they did like 16 minutes intervals compared to 8 minutes and 4 minutes. And I will say that there are many ways to roam, and it depends a little bit on the protocol and also on the subject. But if you are trained and you want to increase your VO2 max, I think there's no doubt that you need to include intervals which are not too long, maybe 4 minutes or so, or even shorter, in order to increase your VO2 max. It's a question of intensity that if you want to induce those genes responsible for making all the changes which will increase your VO2 max, you need a certain amount of intensity. For people who are not trained, I mean, like a sedentary person, there will be a large increase in VO2 max even at a lower intensity, because they are sort of at a lower level.
And potentially even at a lower level, they might be at a high percentage of their VO2 max because they don't have that same metabolic engine that the more well-trained athletes has. So the key point here, I guess, what is the practical application? Is it that the athletes should be doing a good amount of low intensity training, but then include those 1 or 2 sessions per week with shorter high intensity intervals? Is that the key takeaway, or do you have anything else to add?
Yeah. What I normally do with master athletes, because master athletes are have a little longer sort of need for
recovery,
for restitution, recovery. So what I normally do, instead of doing 3 hard weeks and 1 easy week, I do 2 hard weeks and 1 easy week. So and in the hard weeks, it would be like 2 sessions a week with the hard training, and then in the recovery week, it would be 1. So in a 3 week period, it would be 5 or 6, depending on the period, hard sessions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know that triathletes, that's not your main coaching field.
No, that's true.
But it's interesting because triathlon is difficult. We talked a little bit about this before starting the interview about finding the balance. But theoretically, and what a lot of people do actually in the real world, even like at the elite level, is 2 hard sessions per week per discipline. So 2 hard swims, 2 hard bikes, 2 hard runs. How do you see that for masters athletes that still have that need for recovery? And are all of those high intensity sessions VO2 max intervals, or are there's something else in some of those sessions that is maybe a little bit less taxing?
Yeah, I think it's also a question of volume of high intensity training. So if you say needed 2 swim session, 2 bike session, and 2 run session with high intensity, I mean, depending on your age and your fitness, of course, there's a limit to how much you can do of hard training a week without burying yourself in a hole. But I know I've been running quite a bit, and I know that running is also tough on you in the sense that you get all these hits from running, and swimming and cycling is a little more easy on you, especially if you're older and have sort of bad knees or whatever you have. I mean, it's it's more forgiving to do biking and cycling. Cycling and swimming, whereas running can be tough on you.
Yeah.
So I would limit, if I were a master at the triathlete, I would tend to go a little easy on the running hard intervals, because that would at least increase the risk of injury. Because the effect on the cardiovascular system, you can say there is a carryover effect. I mean, if you do training on a bike, you will also, and you increase your heart's ability to pump out blood, that will also carry over into the running.
Yeah.
So I would tend to go more hard on the swimming and cycling compared to the running.
Yeah, I agree.
But of course, yeah.
And I also agree what you said with it depends on the volume. Like if you are somebody who are like you're an experienced athlete and you train quite a lot, then potentially you can do 2 hard sessions per discipline per week for those hard weeks and then recover with an easier week. But if you are somebody who trains a more limited number of sessions per week and hours per week, then it probably makes no sense to do that many hard sessions. Then you need to reduce the number of hard sessions to make sure that you really actually reach that sort of VO2 level or power level or however you want to measure it in those hard workouts to make them count.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree.
So the next one then was you mentioned shrinking muscle and losing muscle mass and lean body mass. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and that is a thing that when you're getting over 40, you will discover that your muscles are sort of disappearing without you doing anything else than you normally did, and that has to do with a lot to do with hormones. So if you are male, your testosterone levels will go down, and for both sexes, the growth hormone levels will go down, and that has an impact on your muscle size. And so most endurance athletes, they are afraid of taking on weight because it's a limiter. If you weigh too much, it will inhibit your performance in endurance. Maybe not in swimming, but at least in biking and in running. Having a big torso will not help you. So it has been a sort of a question whether to do strength training or not. But I think if you are a master athlete, there's not a big risk that you will have big bulking muscles, because there is this natural muscle wasting which will happen anyway. So I think it makes a lot more sense to do strength training when you are above 40 than when you're under. And the thing is that just for the VO2 max, where there's this death zone of the number and an increased risk for bad things happening to you, it's exactly the same with muscle. That when you get older and your muscle shrinking, then at a certain point you will be unable to sustain yourself, and you will be unable to do the daily things that you want to do, and that has an impact on your sort of survival or longevity. So there's a twofold reason for doing strength training, and there has been quite a few studies on whether it actually enhances performance in endurance athletes or it doesn't. And I think the take home for a big, you probably know this review by Rønnestrand, where they looked at a lot of studies, and I think the take home is that there is a very good idea of doing strength training if you are an endurance athlete. It will not increase your VO2 max, but it will increase a lot of other stuff, which is good for you. And since if you are a master athlete, you will lose muscle mass automatically, I mean, what you will do is just to counteract the loss of muscle mass. So you will not be a very big and heavy guy or a lady who is too heavy for your exercise. So I think it is very key to do strength training, because it will counteract the reverse the muscle loss, and it will also help you as an endurance athlete.
Yeah, definitely. And that review that you mentioned by Rennestad, I think we can include a link to that in the show notes. Yeah, I've talked about this before on the podcast, and one of the things that they said about the muscle mass is that, like, even for young athletes, you don't, endurance athletes, they simply don't bulk up with strength training. It's just not possible to do that because of the endurance training that we do, but also the general, like, calorie, I guess, equilibrium that we are in, or even a deficit in many cases, unfortunately. But to actually bulk up, you need to have a caloric surplus, and that's typically not the case for most endurance athletes. And also, sorry, go on.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, it depends a little bit on how you do the strength training. I mean, as you probably also know, that if you do limit the amount of repetitions and you do explosive movement and high weights, I mean, the major part of what you will see is an increase in power and strength, and not in muscle mass. So if you keep your repetitions to like 6 or 7, and then do heavy weights, then the major effect is that your signal from the brain to the muscle is getting better.
Yeah, exactly.
And, so you will get stronger, but you will not get bigger.
Yeah.
And I think for the athletes that I train, the master athletes, I recommend a little higher number of repetitions, since then we'll get into the hypertrophy, and we actually want that because we want to counteract the muscle loss. So as you get older, maybe move into like 8 or 10 repetitions instead of keeping it under 6. But still do it to a large degree with the explosive movement, because that's really what you want. You want to train your brain to send signals to all of the muscle fibers at the same time.
Mm. Yeah, that's an interesting point about increasing the repetitions for masters athlete to have some hypertrophy there. So would you do that basically year round with that kind of strength training?
Yeah,
or would you?
Definitely year round. And I know it's for my own sake, I just hate it. I think it's really not fun to sit in these rooms and using the machines or the weights. But I definitely can say that you should do it year round, because the loss of muscle is very rapid, actually. I mean, it is an extreme case, but if you put people my age into bed for 14 days, they will lose 25% of their muscle mass within 14 days.
Wow.
And I know that it is a extreme case, lying completely still in a bed. But the hormone levels that you have in your body do not favor muscle growth. So it actually favors the opposite. So there's this tendency to lose muscle all the time. So I think it's definitely worthwhile to do it year round. Mm. And what I personally do myself and recommend is that during the season where you would like to be on your bike or out running or swimming or whatever, limit yourself to 1 session a week, because that will prevent the muscle loss. It will not gain anything, but you will prevent if you do 1 session a week.
And then in the off season you might do 2 per week. Is that what?
Yeah. Even 3 per week. I mean, if it's lousy weather, then do strength training instead, and then maybe also include some sessions where you do a high number of repetitions in order to sort of do muscle endurance instead.
Yeah.
So like more than 20 repetitions in a rapid fashion.
Yeah, they're not all boring. They're not all boring, those strength sessions. When the weather is bad, you can be in and catch up on podcasts, for example. That's what I usually do.
Exactly.
So, and a couple of follow-up questions there. What kind of, you mentioned explosive movements, but what exercises would you recommend that athletes do, for some examples?
So what I tend to do is try to make it as simple as possible. And I mean, 6 exercises is sort of the lower limit. So you should do something which where you pull with your arms, and one where you push with your arms. So pull can be in a machine, or it could be a sitting row. And where you push with your arms is basically a bench press or push-ups, depending on your strength. And then you should have 2 exercises for the legs, and the best leg exercise is the squat, because it trains a lot of other stuff as well. But if you have weak knees or you are new to strength training, I think the leg press machine, where you sort of sit in a chair and push away a plate, is better because it's much more safe on your knees. But the squat is the sort of golden exercise for training your leg and your whole core, and so it is a very nice exercise. And then for the stomach and back, different exercises, and for the stomach and in the back, it doesn't have to be very heavy weights, because the main purpose of that is to increase your sort of stability in your core. So I would say that the 4 exercises on the arms and legs, it should be with the heavy weights, whereas the back and stomach, I mean, you could do more repetitions, and then maybe do this yoga ball, where you have some balance included as well, in order to sort of stabilize your body.
Yeah.
And
final question on strength training for those leg and upper body exercises. When you how many sets would you do of each exercise, and what would the recovery be between sets?
Yeah, I would think that obviously if you are new, you should start with maybe 12, 15 repetitions, but you should, as fast as possible, get down to those 6 repetitions or about that. And then you should do 3 to 4 sets, and maybe a couple of minutes between each.
Yeah.
If you are in getting down to a very heavy weight, you can barely do them for 6 repetitions. I think it's better for the sort of mental part of it to do 1 exercise at a time. So instead of doing, for example, squats, and then do something for the arms and back to the squats and then back to the arms, which will save you time. I think when you are in that phase where you do heavy weights, it's as much as a physical thing, it's also a mental thing. So it is good to relax completely between the sets. So when you do those, especially for the legs, which are very important for us as endurance athletes, I think it's a good idea to just sit and rest between the sets, so that you are mentally ready for the next set, which will, that will be very, very heavy, and you need to be ready to do it. For the other exercises, I could easily see that you mix them up and do sort of a circuit training, so that you save some time. But for the legs, I think it's a good idea to relax between sets.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because otherwise it's difficult to get the most out of yourself, and recovery as well. Like I like to prescribe at least 2 minutes, ideally 3, but I know that a lot of people don't have the patience to wait for that long. So 2 is sort of the minimum.
I mean, sitting there and waiting and looking at the watch is annoying, but I think for the legs you should do it, because then you will get the most out of the exercise.
Yeah, and that's what's going back to that Rønnestad review. When you get the most out of those sort of higher weight, lower rep exercises for the legs, that's specifically when you increase your exercise economy, which will then translate to that improved performance. So it's very important to remember that end goal as well. It's even though for the masters athlete, it's as much about what we talked about, like the muscle mass and muscle strength, but you also have that performance at the end of the day that you can take into account, and consider that recovery between sets as an important part of that performance puzzle. So moving on then to the next challenge, which is the changed metabolism. Let's talk about that.
This is normally the point which raises the most discussion, because there is, as you know, a lot of recommendations on what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat, and what is the best for you in terms of performance, and there's a lot of people reading magazines where there's a lot of stories about this and that. So it is a very discussed area. But I think from a scientific point of view, I did my PhD, as I said, on glycogen metabolism, And there's for endurance athletes, there's a very strong correlation between the pre-muscle glycogen levels and the time to exhaustion. So the more glycogen you have in your muscle before you start exercising, the better in terms of doing a long-term exercise. And
at the high performance level as well. So not just the duration of it, but even if it's not a maximum duration, but holding a high output for a certain time.
Yeah, you can. And obviously, triathlon is a discipline where the fat burning is a big part of it. On different disciplines, like if you do a criterium on a road bike, it's only 1 hour. I mean, the majority of the energy will come from carbohydrate burning, whereas in triathlon, I mean, a big part of the energy will come from fat burning. And then there has been this discussion of whether you could adapt your body to burn fat, and whether you could be able to produce as much energy with fat burning as with carbohydrate burning. And I think Louise Burke from Australia did a quite big study a couple of years back, where she took out this question, because there has been a lot of discussion on that. And she took well-trained athletes and put them on a protocol where they increased their VO2 max for, I don't know how many weeks it was, maybe the usual
12 weeks or something, I think. Maybe.
12 weeks, yeah. And then she had them on different diets, and one was with high carbohydrate and one was with low carbohydrate, and then there was this periodized carbohydrate intake, where there's a high intake of carbohydrates, but it's limited to certain periods. And then she looked at the athletes after this increase in VO2 max, either on a treadmill at a certain running speed, or at a race. And I think the conclusion is quite clear that if you are on a low carbohydrate diet, running at the same speed as those on high carbohydrate will then give you a higher oxygen consumption. So
you're less economical, which will limit your performance.
Yes. And then if you do the opposite, you let them race a race. Then what you saw was that the ones on high carbohydrate, they got 190 seconds faster, whereas the low carbohydrate, they got 23 seconds slower on this test race. So I think that, and I talked with Louise on this, and she said it's funny that I had to do all this study with all these subjects in order to prove what's in the biochemistry book. Because it is known that when you look at the ATP production in a muscle, ATP is the source of muscle contraction. It is in all biochemistry books that if you burn only carbohydrates compared to only fat, there's a higher ATP level per seconds with the carbohydrates. So you are able to produce more energy per seconds or per minute or whatever it is with carbohydrates. But the problem is, of course, that the carbohydrate storage in the muscle only will last for maybe 1 hour or 1 hour and 30 minutes if you go at a very high intensity. So for a triathlete or even for a cyclist, it's also important to be able to burn fat, because that's a big part of it. So at a certain point, I mean, you can say what
to give some context for, depending on your weight, of course. But let's say that you're a 70 kilo male, then you might have like 400 grams of glycogen. Is that, you probably know this much better than I do, but I think that 400 grams is roughly the ballpark number.
Yes, I mean the upper limit in human muscle is like 4%, but that requires that you are in a situation where you are completely loaded. My PhD, where we did human studies where we infused glucose and insulin for 8 hours, and that will reach a limit approximately 4 grams of glycogen per 100 grams of muscle, so 4%. But I don't think that you will reach this high value in a daily setting. There you are more in around 3 grams if you're super compensated, if you have done a glycogen loading procedure. And depending on how muscle you have, that will give you a figure of maybe 400 grams, maybe 600 grams, depending on how big you are.
Yeah.
And
so go on. Sorry to jump in there.
Yeah.
Keep going with
I think, and then it depends then on the particular exercise that you do, because if you do cycling, most of what you will use is what you have in your legs. I guess if you do swimming, you will also sort of use a lot of other glycogen stores, like in your arms, and running also engages a little more muscles than cycling, depending on the discipline. But it is impossible to store. I mean, if you go at your anaerobic threshold, you will use all your glycogen stores within maybe an hour or maybe 1.5 hours, unless you take in glucose. And most of us do this by gels or glucose in drinking, and that will spare the use of glycogen which is in the muscle. So that's the idea of taking in gels or carbohydrate containing drinks. That is to spare the amount of glycogen that you have in the muscle, because when the glycogen in the muscle runs out, you will face this called the bunking or the wall or whatever you call it, a situation where there's a risk that your blood glucose will go low, because now there's no glycogen in the muscle, and all the glucose will then go into the muscle, and your blood glucose will go low because the liver cannot produce any more glucose because it already sent out all the glucose it has. And that situation is not very pleasant. Most of us have tried it, and it's not very nice. So the idea is that you should pass the goal line in the exact moment where you have used all your glycogen in your muscle, and because then if you have glycogen left, you could have gone a little faster, and if you have no glycogen, if you're 10 kilometers before the goal, you run out, then you have to slow down. So it is of course a very difficult thing to time this very precisely. So the most of us try to eat a little more glucose than we need during the exercise in order to be as sure as possible that we will not run out. Then this whole issue of using glycogen is quite interesting, because the use of glycogen can either be with oxygen or without oxygen. And when you use oxygen, then you get a lot of energy out of each sugar molecule. But if you do it without oxygen, then you don't get as much energy out of each sugar molecule. And that means if you go too hard, and that is above your anaerobic threshold, then you will use those glycogen stores more rapidly. So you can say that it is uneconomical to go above your anaerobic threshold, because you will spend more glycogen at a faster rate than doing it under. And that is really the game, I guess, also in triathlon, to be right at that border and hopefully a little bit below, because then you will spare your glycogen as much as possible. And for the ability to do this is the ability to deliver oxygen to the muscle, and that we have discussed with the VO2 max is a big part of that, in order to have as big oxygen delivery as possible, you need to train your pump, the heart, and also your blood supply to the muscles. So it is it is.
So just wanted to mention something about the triathlon distances there. That of course, for if you're doing an Ironman, you're not going to try to go even near your anaerobic threshold. So you're probably going to be pretty safe there. But then you have the duration instead. Like you're still going to be very limited by your energy stores and need to fuel accordingly during the race. Whereas if you're doing a sprint distance that lasts 1 hour if you're fast, or faster than 1 hour if you're really fast, then that means that you're going to be at or even above your anaerobic threshold for a lot of the time. So then you might not have the need to fuel a lot because you have enough fuel on board, but you're still going to empty a lot of your stores by the time that you cross that finish line.
Yes. And it depends a little bit on the discipline, because in in mountain biking, which I have coached a lot, the energy output is very fluctuating. So some instances you use a lot of energy because you go uphill, and then in the next moment you go downhill, and so you don't use that much energy. So it's very variable, the energy consumption. Whereas I guess when you do the triathlon, I mean, you try to pace yourself at the pace that you you can handle for that long time.
Yeah, exactly. There is a situation if you do the Olympic distance and you do it in a draft legal format, then you have that sort of criterion style racing on the bike with a lot of surges way above the anaerobic threshold as well, and the race duration is 2 hours or so. So that is a situation when you have a little bit of both. You have quite a long duration, but also you have quite a lot of very high intensity in there. So that's definitely a case where you again need to consider that fueling aspect.
I guess you're right, because I have this, as I mentioned, this triathlete in the club, and I did a testing session of a lot of the athletes, and many mountain bikers do have a very big anaerobic capacity because they train a lot in the sort of uphill, going very fast. And I was expecting this triathlete to have a fairly low anaerobic capacity, because my presumption of the triathletes was that they always did at a certain pace. But much to my surprise, he was very, very, very good at the anaerobic output. In fact, one of the best I have ever tested. So that was a little bit of a surprise to me. So I think maybe also in triathlon, even though that you would think that it is a very steady output, I mean, there must be some power surges when you want to caught up with the other guys, or I don't know how it is, but there must be, because he was really good at anaerobic work, actually.
Yeah, in draft legal triathlon, there are certain lists, and I talked with people. A related episode to this is the one with Sebastian Weber that I did in episode 171, which we can link to as well. We talked a lot about the lactate building rate, VLA max, and for the kind of professional type triathletes that are focusing on the draft legal format, their sort of profile in terms of anaerobic and aerobic power profiles, they are similar to the spring classics riders, so that they need to have endurance, but also the ability to break, do a breakaway or catch up with a breakaway and sprint at the end of the race. So they need to have a little bit of both. So that's quite different from the Ironman and half Ironman athletes that just need to. They can basically focus on reducing that anaerobic capacity and focus everything on the aerobic capacity.
Yeah.
But so how? One more point, by the way, that I just remembered with you mentioning Louise Burke. First, they have now, I think, finished the study with the follow up to the study that you mentioned, the Supernova study. But I don't think they published the results yet. But definitely follow Louise on Twitter, and you can check in on updates there. The second thing is, I really loved what you said, that she had mentioned that it's funny that she had to do all that work to prove what's in a biochemistry book, because that's something that I've actually mentioned myself quite a few times, that it's nothing magical happens. We have chemical equations going on at the cellular level, and it's fairly straightforward what's happening. So it's you can't really fool the body in that way.
No. And I say the ATP production, I mean, you cannot decide yourself which mechanism will produce the ATP in your body, which you use for muscle contraction. It is a question of intensity and your, you can say, training condition. So if you are very well trained, it will take more to get into this anaerobic state, and therefore you can save your glycogen stores. But it is a question of intensity. So, and for every person there is a sort of a limit where you start to use this anaerobic and when you can do a fat oxidation as energy source or not. It depends entirely on your training condition. But unfortunately you cannot decide yourself, or so to switch to fat oxidation at a certain time. You cannot do that, but it depends on your intensity.
Yeah, exactly. But if you follow the training that you talked about for the VO2 max, if you increase your VO2 max, then you're also going to increase your fat oxidation at sub maximal levels. So the training
Exactly.
is so important there. But how does the nutrition and the change metabolism? Let's tie it now into the aging athlete, because I'm sure you have a point a point there with how the aging athlete should approach this.
Exactly. I mean, for the young kids, I mean, the message is quite clear. You just need to eat enough carbohydrate in order to be able to perform. But as you get older, as I mentioned, the hormones change in the body, and there's this tendency that your muscle will turn into fat. And many people about 50 have seen this, that suddenly there's appearing some flaps on the sides, and you haven't really done anything to do this. It's just happened, and that is due to the hormones. And what tends to happen is that if you eat something with a high glycemic index or carbohydrates in general, your body will produce insulin, and insulin is a very efficient way to stop fat oxidation. The instant you have just a small amount of insulin in your body, your muscle will stop burning fat, and that is then if you eat a lot of carbohydrates, you will tend to have a high insulin level all day long. And for people about 50, that is not good, because then they will have no fat oxidation at all, because they just keep the insulin up. Therefore, there has been all this discussion of paleo diet and fasting and whatever have you, in order to decrease the insulin level, to let the body do fat oxidations in order to get rid of some of this body fat. So that then turns into a sort of a divergent interest. So your optimal performance as an athlete will require that you eat carbohydrates, and the optimal diet for your lifestyle is to eat a little carbohydrate. So if you go on a paleo diet or ketone diet or whatever, you will control your insulin levels, and you will probably also lose some weight. But then if you want to beat the guy in the club in the next race, you probably will not succeed, because now you start off on the starting line with low glycogen levels, and you're not able to do this race or whatever it is as fast as you could. So therefore, I think also Louisa has embarked on this, on try to do your carbohydrate intake at a certain point in time. So what she called periodized carbohydrate intake. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because then you will allow your body to have periods where you have low carbohydrates and low insulin, and then you can burn fat. And then at other points you will fill up the store, so you're ready to compete. So for example, if you're going to, you know that you're going to train hard Tuesday afternoon, it is a good idea to start the day before eating carbohydrates, so that you, when you start off this training, say 5 o'clock in the evening, Tuesday, you know that your glycogen levels are not too low. Because if you try to do a VO2max training with the low glycogen stores, you will not have the quality in the training. Mm. So it is important to try to make sure that on competition and at those hard trainings, that your glycogen levels are not too low. The other trainings, if you're going for a long steady ride for 4 hours with your bodies, I mean, it's perfectly okay to have a fairly low glycogen level. That doesn't, it just will be a little hard maybe in the end, but it's okay. But I think if you want to have the quality out of those hard trainings, you need to be ready to do it, and that means the ATP production machinery should be ready to produce a lot of ATP at a short time, and that requires that you have glycogen in the muscle.
So let's say we have an athlete that maybe they have their hard training days on, for example, a Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. This is a triathlete, and they might do as we said, like one hard VO2 max session in the swim, bike, and then the run, perhaps even a bit less than VO2 max, but still a hard session. So you say that maybe the evening before they start to introduce a little bit more carbohydrate and leading up to the workout. Yeah. So then you still have plenty of time to be on a more low carbohydrate diet in between. What about immediately after workouts? Would you still try to replenish glycogen then? Or?
It depends a little bit on the situation. If you are in a not too important period of your training, I mean, it's okay to limit the amount of carbohydrate you take in, but if it is a compact and a heavy training period, I would definitely fill up the stores just after, because I mean, there's this risk that you actually will slow down recovery if you do not fill up the glycogen stores.
Yeah, and things like immune function as well increase the risk.
Exactly. Yeah, so it depends. If you are let's say you are in a 3-week period where you do very hard training, I would definitely fill up the stores after exercise, especially hard exercise, because the glycogen levels would be low. And I think it's important to prevent that you get sick, because we all know that getting sick is a killer for the training. So that is an important issue, yes.
And how low would you go in those periods when you have lower carbohydrate intake? What do you have any recommendations for that?
I don't know. I think if you are on a training camp, or if you are in a heavy training weeks, we are talking about maybe 8 to 10 grams per kilo per day of carbohydrate. But if you are in a period where it's not too important for you to be able to perform, you can go as low as maybe 2 or 3 grams, or even lower. Depends on who you are, and if you want to lose weight, for example, you can go a couple of weeks with quite low glycogen intake. Then the training will be
2 or 3 grams per kilogram body weight, not lean body mass, but actually kilograms. Okay, so that's for a 75 kilogram athlete, that would be like 150 to 225. So 150 would be what is quite often cited as being like sort of fairly low, I guess so. That's great to get an idea.
And also when you are getting older, it's important to have a little focus on protein intake. I mean, normally we get enough protein with a normal diet, but there is evidence to suggest that when you get older, the stimulation of muscle protein synthesis is a little less with the protein intake than it is in young people. So you need, for a young person, you may only need like 15 to 20 grams, whereas a protein to stimulate the protein synthesis. But whereas you're a little bit older, it will maybe take 30 grams of protein in order to increase the protein synthesis. And also, do
you refer specifically to after workouts, or do you refer to like with every meal you would want to try to get that amount of protein?
The evidence seems to suggest it's much better to do the protein intake 4 times a day. It's spread out, and 30 grams per meal. So that would be either 3 eggs or a can of tuna or something like that in that magnitude at each meal. And if you don't like to eat eggs or tuna in the morning, maybe some yogurt or whatever, it doesn't matter that much. It just has to be quality protein. And then when I say quality protein, people ask me, what is quality protein? And I said, the easy thing is to say it needs to be dairy or meat, fish or chicken or whatever. Then you are home safe. But if you are a vegetarian or a vegan even, then you have to think a little more, because you need to make sure that all the amino acids that you want are in what you eat. And that will require that you look a little bit on the list of ingredients in what you eat.
Yeah, definitely.
But as long as you eat meat or drink milk or whatever, then you don't have to think. You just have to look at the number of grams that you intake.
Yeah,
and there
in terms of grams of protein per day per kilogram body weight, do you have like a ballpark number, like 2 grams per kilogram body weight that you'd like to recommend? Or?
Yeah, exactly. I would say that for people, master athletes, we are getting near 2 grams per kilo per day than 1. So it is 30 grams each meal, or maybe 1.5 grams per kilo per day, depending on how big you are. I mean, obviously a big 120 kilo person would require more.
Yeah. And anything else? Anything else on the diet side that we haven't mentioned? So to summarize, I guess for the masters athlete, can you do a quick summary of it?
Yeah, there's one thing which I find is if you want to train your fat oxidation, and I guess in triathlon that would be interesting to do. I mean, there are many protocols to do this, to skip breakfast and wait all day long and then go for a long ride in the afternoon. But I think there's this one protocol also by Louise Burke, where you do this hard training in the afternoon, say 4 by 5 minutes or something like that, which will really empty your glycogen stores. And then after that training, you just eat something with no carbohydrates, so chicken, cheese, whatever have you, ham. And then in the next morning, you go for a 1 to 2 hour steady ride, because then you will start off that training with low glycogen stores, and you will go fat burning right from the beginning of the training. And I find, personally, I find that more easy than going for a very long steady ride and then wait for the glycogen stores to get depleted. So it is a protocol which has shown to be, if you do this, it actually increases the economy of your exercise.
Mm.
And it is a way.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's an easy. We can link to that paper as well. But I think it's an easy way to train your fat oxidation in the sense that it's you only have most of the fasting is done during the nighttime because you're sleeping, and then the only thing you have to do is to skip breakfast, then go out for this ride in the morning, maybe commuting to work or whatever have you, and then you can eat breakfast after that training.
Yeah, interesting. So please send me that paper because I'm not familiar with that one. So that would be good. Another option that exists that I used for myself and athletes is to have a hard session in the morning and eat quite low carb after that session and for the rest of for lunch and then you have an easy steady aerobic session in the afternoon where you haven't really refueled with a lot of carbs in between that hard session that sort of empties the glycogen stores. So that's another spin on the same idea, I guess. But you don't have the overnight fast in between. So I can see that perhaps that one that you described is more effective.
Yeah, and I think the good thing is that this period where you don't eat so much is basically while you're sleeping. So it's I think it's at least from a mental point of view, it's easier. But basically, it's the same kind of protocol that you do hard training to empty glycogen stores, and then you wait a while, and then you do some steady ride. So.
So to wrap up, for aging athletes, it's good to periodize your carbohydrate intake so that you are fueled for the high-end sessions and, of course, for the races. But then in between, you try to limit to maybe 2 to 3 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram body weight per day. You want to be diligent with your protein intake, 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram per day, and spread it out across the day. So 20 to 30 grams per meal. And what else did we have? Did I miss something there? Or was that a good summary?
No, I think it's a good summary. There is instead of eating one big steak in the evening, it's important to take in protein during the day. That is.
I think it's a very common mistake that people don't spread it out a lot. Yeah. Let's go through the last 2 challenges and try to do it a bit quickly. But these are the small ones, not the big ones. So we've now covered the big ones.
We can cover this fairly easy because I mean for the balance, coordination, flexibility, and all that, we all know that getting older you have more difficulties to reach your toes, and you don't like to go in the merry-go-rounds and all that stuff. But it has been shown quite efficiently that all this, just like with the VO2 max and the strength, it is trainable. So the major reason for us being worse doing balance and all that stuff is that we stopped doing what we did when we were younger. So we don't go in a merry-go-round anymore, and that's why we are too bad at it, and we don't run up and down slippery rocks or whatever anymore, and that's why we are bad at it. So I know for a fact, because I have tried to the past couple of months to be able to stand on a yoga ball. And in the beginning, I could not do it at all, but now I can actually stand on it. So it is trainable, and science also show this, that it is because we don't do it, and it has to do with this. I think this slogan, use it or lose it, is very spot on.
And can you talk about why we need those things as endurance athletes?
Yes, I can. First of all, it will risk the limit, it will limit the amount of injuries you get. If your range of movement in your joints are bigger, then the risk of doing an overstretching or do something which will hurt your muscle or your joints is much less. And also in the case of a fall, like while you're running, your foot hits something, then your speed and your reflexes will be able to cover that, because you know what to do when you are about to fall. You know how to stick out your foot very rapidly, and if you don't train that, you will lose it. And for biking, also balance is very important. Cornering, and when you are hit on the handlebar by somebody, then the balance is a key here. But it's not like there's a lot of studies showing this. So it's more like an experience as a coach. I have seen that people who take care of their body in the sense that they do flexibility, they do fare much nicer in corners, and especially in mountain biking, it's quite important to be both flexible but also have a good balance. And I think for your general life and your ability to have a long and healthy life, there the evidence clearly show that both your quality of life and your risk of falling, breaking your hip or whatever, is much less if you do flexibility and coordination and balance and stuff like that.
And how often and how long should you practice this, and what kind of exercises would you recommend? Do you have some resource that people can go to, perhaps online, and find some good exercises or workout routines?
Yeah, I think that one thing which is very useful is this yoga ball. It's fairly cheap to buy, and I mean, there's a lot of things you can do on this with respect to balance and coordination, and it is a very easy tool to use. And it's not very expensive. And there's a lot of sites where you can find exercises for both flexibility and also for balance on these balls. So I would definitely recommend a yoga ball or fitness ball or whatever. In terms of other stuff, I think it's also a part of what we can get into with the last point, that this you should continue to challenge yourself. I mean, you should not say, well, I'm getting 50 and now I do not want to climb in trees anymore, or go on this obstacles course because I'm too old for that. On the contrary, you should say, well, this is a challenge. I'm super bad at doing balance on a yoga ball, so now I challenge myself. I will do this within 3 months or whatever, because it is a question of doing it, just like this Nike slogan, just do it, because we will get better at all those things if we do them. But it is clear that if we don't do them, then we will lose the ability. So all kinds of stuff that will challenge your coordination and stuff like playing soccer, climbing trees, or go mountain biking or whatever, which takes you out of your comfort zone, will actually help you maintain those skills.
Yeah, perfect. So you don't even have to necessarily put too much thought into, I guess, structured training, but just challenging yourself.
Do stuff which is challenging, like try to balance on a small. If there's a small division between a park and a road that you can balance on, then try to balance on that. Or if you walk on the sidewalk, try to go on the line there without falling, or try to stand on one leg while you're brushing your teeth with closed eyes, or whatever have you. I mean, it's fairly simple. It's just to do things that you know you're not too good at.
Yeah, that's great. Those are really great tips.
Yeah.
What about flexibility? Do you need to have like structured stretching sessions for that?
For the flexibility, there's I think especially when you do biking, there's this tendency that your back of your thigh will be short, and that will give you back pain. So I think there's a good reason for doing stretches of the legs quite often, actually. And I mean, you can actually do this every day if you want. There's no risk of doing it. The thing is that you need to do it in a proper way, and in a proper way is that it should not hurt. It's not good to do it if it hurts. You should do it. You should feel the stretch, and it should be. Most people describe that it's pleasant afterwards. So it should be sort of a stretch which you can feel, but it should not hurt. And then you should do it
static, or
static, definitely static. Definitely static, and I think you can do it 30 seconds 3 times. That's normally what is recommended, and I think you can do it on all days. And basically, I mean, do it while you watch stuff on the Netflix, because then you're just sitting there anyway. And I think you can do it every day. You can do it also if you are in a meeting. Or whatever you do, just do some passive stretching of your legs, and then that is fairly easy to do. And I guess if you are triathletes, you also need to stretch your upper body equally much, because you use your breast muscle and your back muscle to a large degree.
Yeah, and I think mobility before swimming and running is quite important for triathletes as well. Not necessarily enhance flexibility, but it acutely enhances the mobilization of your range of flexibility, compared to, like, it sort of brings you closer to that ceiling of flexibility that you have compared to what you would do without the mobilization.
And if you look at world-class athletes who swims in the World Championship, so you can see what they do. I mean, they are swinging their arms like crazy, and they are doing sort of flying movements with their arms and stuff like that. And I think that's as a warm-up, that is the way to do it, to do this sort of more active stretching than the ones I described right now.
Okay, so the final challenge is the mental barrier.
Yeah,
so we covered this off.
We have touched a little bit on it. I think the difference here is your own attitude. I mean, if your attitude is, well, I'm getting 50 and there's stuff which I shouldn't do because I'm getting older and I have to take care of myself, that is the complete wrong attitude. Your attitude should instead be, there's a lot of possibilities for me still. I need to do these hard intervals, and I need to lift those heavy weights because I want to beat the other guys in the club. And I mean, it's very important that you don't let yourself fall into this, I had to protect myself mode, or I'm getting too old for this, because that is the direct route to getting old too fast. So what you need to do is to have the attitude, well, I need to train hard just as I was younger, because that will keep me on the forefront of my physical ability. And so you need to keep up those things that you did when you were 20. So hard intervals, heavy weights, a lot of jumping around and making all kinds of stupid stuff. That will keep you young. On the contrary, if you have this sort of sedentary attitude, well, this is too dangerous for me, then you will get old. So I think it's a mental thing that you should say, well, I'm not going to be weaker than the other guys. I will train hard and I will do my part. Of course, you have to take care of yourself because your bones or your joints are a little more fragile and stuff like that. But I think the overall take home is use it or lose it. So you should continue to train hard even though that you are above 50 or 40 or whatever it is. It is important to keep the pressure on, because if you let go of the pressure, then you will decline much more rapidly.
Yeah, perfect summary. As long as you don't keep up with the partying and the drinking of your 20s.
Yeah. That is true.
So let's wrap up here with the rapid fire questions. So answer these in just one sentence.
Yep.
And the first one is, what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to endurance sports?
Yeah, I think I personally is very fond of the Training Peaks. I mean, I use that for coaching the athletes, but they also have quite a few nice blogs and on various issues, and both as a coach, but also as an athlete.
Yeah, good one. What's a personal habit that's helped you achieve success?
I think maybe it's the one that we discussed before with this attitude, that I have always felt that I was 20 years old inside. So I have kept on doing a lot of fun stuff, and training young kids definitely helped me do that.
And finally, what do you wish you had known or done differently at some point in your career?
Yeah, well, actually, I first started being a coach at late in life, or not late, but I would actually have liked to work with young kids and stuff when I was even younger. So a longer career as a coach, I would have liked.
Okay, thank you so much, Bo. It was a real pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Bye. All right, hope that you enjoyed that episode. And if you are a Masters athlete, especially, I hope that you found it really, really useful and enlightening, perhaps in terms of what sort of strategies and changes you might want to do to counterbalance those changes that occur with age. So remember again, the top 5 challenges and how to tackle them are a declining VO2 max aerobic capacity. And one of the best ways to tackle that is with maintaining high intensity workouts in your training schedule. The second one is loss of strength and muscle mass, and that is tackled with the right kind of strength training. So we talked about explosive strength training, high weight, low rep, but also some form of hypertrophy training. So a little bit more moderate weight and moderate reps. And I'll take this opportunity to promote the strength training plan that I have on scientifictriathlon.com that you can buy. It's very affordable. It's 39 euros. So if you're not quite sure based on this episode yet how to structure your own strength training, that plan will definitely fit the bill for Masters athletes as well as non-Masters athletes, for endurance athletes in general. It is designed for that purpose. The third point was nutrition and having a periodized carbohydrate intake to make sure that you have glycogen on board for key training and racing, but also so that you lower that insulin response in day-to-day life outside of those key workouts. So that would mean, as an example, perhaps shooting for 2 to 3 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram body weight per day. And those 3, VO2 max, declining VO2 max, declining muscle mass and strength, and the changed metabolism, those are the 3 main ones. But then we also had the challenge of losing flexibility, balance, and coordination. And there, the whole point was to just keep working on it because it's trainable and keep challenging yourself. And finally, we had the right attitude towards aging. It is possible to stay fast or even get faster, like we heard examples of older people that have increased VO2 max, for example, even in their 50s or even later on when you're 101 years old. So if that's you, if you're lucky enough to be that old, there's still hope for improved fitness. So have the right mental attitude. That was the final piece of advice from Bo. So thank you, Bo. It was really, really useful, and I really enjoyed the chat. We have plenty of links for you as well in the show notes that you can find on thattriathlonshow.com. All the papers that we talked about, and also some related episodes. I have done one episode on Masters athletes, so this exact same topic, but that was way back in episode 20. But it's still as relevant, and a lot of the papers that Bo cited here I used as well for that episode. So we are very much on the same page. And that one was called Masters Athletes, How to Minimize the Performance Decline for Aging Triathletes. Then we had episode 102, which was an interview with Karen Smyers called Mastering Triathlon as a Masters Athlete. And those were the two main episodes. Oh yes, in terms of strength training, if you want to dig deeper into that, definitely check out episode 81, the Triathlete's strength training formula, where I dig deep into the research on that, including, for example, the review by Rönnestad et al. That we talked about. You'll find all of that in the show notes. Again, thattriathlonshow.com. And as a little teaser for what's coming up, I'm not exactly sure if it will be the next episode or in a couple of weeks' time, but in the very near future, I have a fantastic interview for you with Dr. Steven Seiler, who is the researcher who, I guess, popularized the concept of polarized training. He did not invent it by any means, as I'm sure he will say, but he has done plenty of research in that area, and he has brought it to the masses, so to say, and he's done great other work as well, interval training, for example. He's done plenty of work in that field. So make sure that you subscribe, if you aren't already subscribed to the podcast, so that you get all the episodes when they are released, because we have new episodes every Monday and Thursday. So it's easy to miss if you aren't subscribed. So click that subscribe button in whatever app you use to listen to the podcast. And if you have friends, colleagues, family members that might be interested, please make sure that you spread the word about it. It really helps. And growing the podcast is a benefit for all of us, because it means that I can keep focusing on it, keep making it a priority, and to be consistent with putting out the content here and spending the time with interviews, research, and all of the things that go into creating a podcast. Big thanks finally to our sponsors, Aroka, that you can find on aroka.com. You can take 20% off your entire order with the promo code TTS, all caps. And to Precision Hydration, that you can find on precisionhydration.com. You can take their free online sweat test to get an individualized hydration strategy for you. And you can get your first box for free with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow, all one word, all caps. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.